everyone, and welcome to the 5th plenary speech of the 18th Asia TEFL International Conference with Korea TESOL. It is with great pleasure to introduce to you our plenary speaker, Dr. Azira Binti Hashim. Dr. Hashim is a professor in the English Language Department, former executive director of the Asia-Europe Institute, and former director of the Center for ASEAN Regionalism at the University of Malaya. She is also vice president of ILA and the founding president of the Malaysian Association of Applied Linguistics. She has published in top journals, has books published with Cambridge University Press and Routledge, and is on several journal editorial boards. She is very much involved in ASEAN EU research, seminars, and outreach activities. She is world-renowned and has received several prestigious awards and recognition. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Hashim here with us. The title of her plenary speech is English as Working, Second, and Foreign Language in ASEAN and Prospects for ELT. If you have any questions, please leave the questions in the chat room, and we will accept questions after the talk is over. Also, Dr. Hashim will be available after her talk on the virtual conference platform for one-on-one meetings and group chat starting from 1400 to 1420. So please join her for individual chats through the virtual conference platform in the lounge function after the talk. Without further ado, please extend a warm welcome to Dr. Hashim. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lee. A very good afternoon, a very good morning to everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank the organizing committee, Professor Park Joo-kyung and Professor Lee Hik-young and everyone in the team for the invitation to speak at the Asia TEFL 2020. Secondly, I would like to congratulate the organizing team for actually coming up with something really very impressive. I was hoping to visit South Korea actually for this conference, but this is actually an amazing alternative. My talk will focus on ASEAN, a very big and diverse region. I will talk about English in the region. I will, Is it possible to move it? Okay. So I will be talking about ASEAN in general. I will give a little bit of background to the region. I will talk about English in ASEAN, about developments that have taken place over the recent decades. I will touch upon the higher education policies, the education landscape, because there's been a lot of things that have been happening in the region. I will then summarize the language policies. And because the area is rather diverse, there are 10 countries involved, I will actually summarize the policies for each country. I will talk about language policies and multilingualism in the region, and I will finally talk about challenges and what are the approaches that can be adopted for English in education. Sorry, I'm not able to move the slide forward. Okay, a background to the region. For those of you who are not so familiar with ASEAN, it is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It was formed in 1967 when we signed the Bangkok Declaration. We originally had 5 original members, which are Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand. And later, other members joined. So ASEAN then included Brunei in 1984, Vietnam in 1995, Laos and Myanmar in 1997, and finally Cambodia in 1999. So this is a map that shows you the 10 countries of ASEAN. Okay. Located all over Southeast Asia. Okay, and with the formation of ASEAN in 1967, there then came about pressure to maintain or strengthen English in the education system. For some of the countries, English was very much used already. But then with this founding of ASEAN, there was a new dimension for policies. English was sanctioned as the working language of ASEAN in Article 34 of the ASEAN Charter in 2009. It's the language used in all ASEAN meetings. It is also the global language of aid in international institutions, for example, the United Nations, the World Bank, and their presence actually has been pretty strong in the region. It's the language of diplomacy among all the ASEAN member states. It's the language for intra-regional trade and mobility, contributing towards the nation's growth. And in the academic environment, especially in higher education, there is the discussion about what language should be the medium of instruction, the language of the university management, the pedagogies, the language used in pedagogies and for social interactions. So in all the different countries, there's been a lot of discussion on which language should be adopted, and I will talk a little bit about each country soon. Okay, if you look at the 10 different countries, all of them are at different stages of nation building. Independence was achieved at different periods of time. And you could say that there is a conflicting demands for national policies versus what's needed in ASEAN itself. So all ASEAN member countries aspire to be integrated nations. We became a community in 2015. So we aim to become further integrated, becoming regional and global players within ASEAN and beyond. And for all this, English is promoted as the vehicle of empowerment and participation from the ASEAN and also from the global angle. So English serves as a number of different functions, multiple functions. It's a second language in some countries. It's a foreign language in some other countries. It's even a first language among certain communities in certain countries. And it is the lingua franca across ASEAN. So English has gone hand in hand with economic growth in ASEAN. And in some of the countries, you see the emergence of varieties of English. Established varieties have been written about. In fact, features have been codified for some of the varieties. So we've seen the emergence of different varieties of English, varieties which are set in complex, multilingual, and functionally differentiated settings. And a lot of work has been written about some of these varieties. Malaysian varieties, the Malaysian variety has been written quite extensively, just like English in Singapore, English in the Philippines, and English in Brunei as well. And there are also quite a lot of work on English in the other countries as well. So we've got the outer circle countries, which would be the former colonies of Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, and the Philippines, where English is spoken widely. And the varieties have been described in quite extensively. And the varieties are no longer just British or American or Australian anymore. So the norms which are formed have been described as well. These are not forms which are found in, for example, Malaysian English, Singapore English. So to what extent they cut across national boundaries to create a new ASEAN lingua franca remains to be seen. Some work has been written about this, but this needs further investigation. So the effects of English in ASEAN's language policies, what do we see in all the countries? We see the teaching of English in primary schools and in universities in all the ASEAN countries. It is seen to be a near universal basic skill. English teaching and learning is essential, is seen to be essential in all the countries to produce skilled labor. It's important for business in ASEAN and also beyond ASEAN. So therefore, there's a shift in interest from English as a foreign language to English as a lingua franca. And there's been discussions about less stress on native English fluency to more emphasis on communicative competence in multilingual environments. So that has become more crucial. So the importance of communicating with non-native speakers, and there's more and more of a demand for English teaching and English as a medium of instruction in higher education. We see that happening all over the region. In many universities, English is already the medium of instruction for many different programs. And in other countries, it's becoming more and more of a medium of instruction as well. Okay, I will then touch on the language education policies in all the 10 countries. And because there are so many countries involved, I will just give a survey of English and language policies in each one of them. I start with Malaysia, where we became independent in 1957. And prior to that, we were colonized by the British. So after 1957, efforts were put into place to strengthen the Malay language. The Article 152 of the Constitution states that Malay is the official and the sole national language. English was still used in the country, but it was phased out after 10 years. So by the 1980s, Malay was the medium of instruction in all schools. It was also the medium of instruction in public institutes of higher education. But after several years, the sole promotion of Malay was judged to be unsatisfactory. There were a number of graduates who were not able to interact in English. There were problems of getting jobs in multinational companies, for example. So a new policy was announced in 2003 where English was reintroduced as a medium of instruction for mathematics and science from the first year of primary school. And that also was judged to be unsuccessful. It was implemented rather quickly, and there were not enough teachers who were trained to do that. So after several years, there was a reversal of the policy, and Malay was reinstated as a medium of instruction again in 2012. But at the same time, English was still considered to be important. So to reinforce the importance of both Malay and English, we had the policy of upholding Malay and also strengthening English. So efforts were also put in place to strengthen English in schools, but Malay became the medium of instruction again for mathematics and science. If you look at Singapore, which actually has a similar colonial past to Malaysia, but it is actually gone in a different direction. So in Singapore, when it achieved independence, there were four languages were made official languages. Malay, Mandarin, Tamil, and English. They are four official languages in Singapore. The national language is Malay. It's actually still Malay in Singapore. However, although initially other languages were used in schools, and English was taught as the first language or the second language, there were Malay, Chinese, Tamil schools. By 1987, English had become the medium of instruction in all schools. English was considered to be the language that was important for globalization, for taking part in internationalization in business. Yeah? So it became the language of instruction in all schools, in higher education institutions. In official discourse, the three other languages were referred to as mother tongues, and they're studied as subjects by all students. But Singapore has adopted what is called pragmatic multilingualism. English is emphasized. It is made the medium of instruction. It is the language that's used in all the domains. So what they consider is that a success for English is a success for the country's economy as well. Okay, we turn now to Brunei, which has also gone a different path, from Malaysia. The Constitution of 1959 stipulates Standard Malay as the official language. Brunei Malay is the first language of most people in Brunei and the main language for oral communication, but majority of the population would be considered multilingual or plurilingual. In 1984, the bilingual language education system was adopted using both Malay and English. So what the policy was a dual policy, a dui bahasa policy, the use of two languages, meaning that Malay was used as a medium of instruction until primary 3, after which Malay was used for some subjects and English used for others. In 2009, a new system of education was introduced called the National System of Education for the 21st Century. From then onwards, mathematics and science have been taught in English from the start of primary school. So you can see that Brunei has gone a different path from Malaysia, and from Singapore. In the Philippines, a lot has happened. In the Philippines, nationalist movements took place in the 1960s. Philippines was colonized by the Spanish and the Americans. In the up to the early 1970s, there were nationalist movements. It led to Philippines developing its own language policies. A compromise was established in 1974. The bilingual education system was established. All schools from grade 1 through to high school will be divided between English and Filipino. There was the introduction of a bilingual education policy in 1987, stipulating the use of English for science and mathematics, Filipino to be used in all the other courses. English has remained a dominant language of literacy, although there were efforts to widen the domains of Filipino, mainly because of the economic advantage it has to offer. In 2003, there was a return to English as a medium of instruction and efforts to permanently institutionalize English. However, there were no laws that were passed at that time. There was talk about fears of an English-deprived future, because of the need for Filipinos to work in a global environment. So amidst the fears of losing English, there was also a new bill that was proposed in 2008. It was the proposal for the use of mother tongues, not just English or Filipino, but mother tongues to be used also as media of instruction in education. Use of the first language as the primary medium of instruction from preschool to grade 6. So that's happened in certain areas. It's acknowledged that because of the multilingual nature of the Philippines, other Philippines language need to be recognized as well, apart from English and Filipino. So in the Philippines, there is the institutionalizing of the mother tongue-based multilingual education in 2009. And Article 1 of this policy stipulates the superiority of the use of the learner's mother tongue or first language in improving outcomes. So you see different policies being put into place in that country as well. In Thailand, which was the only country that was never colonized, in 1921, English was added to the national curriculum starting from grade 5. 1980s, the national curriculum changed from the teaching of English from grade 5 to an earlier grade in grade 1. The reason being that students need to master their first language before they're introduced to a second language. At present, English is a mandatory subject for every Thai student. It is not an official second language, but it is in practice the de facto second language, like in Malaysia and in the Philippines. It is used in a wide range of domains. So there were other programs and strategies adopted by the Thai government to improve English language teaching and to increase the level of English proficiency. So for example, the bilingual program in 1995 established English programs in public and private schools where 4 subjects were taught in English. Foreign teachers were brought in to teach the subjects in English, but there were also efforts in promoting a few vernacular languages in education. In the Thai Constitution of 1997, it actually allows for minorities to use their languages. And since the late 1990s, the use of vernaculars has increased. And there's been actually quite a lot of efforts in Thailand also for looking at the use of minority languages in primary education. In Indonesia, there was a major education priority in the 1950s to improve literacy in Indonesian from very low levels. It's the only language of instruction, which precluded the use of other local languages. English was taught as a foreign language throughout secondary schools. There was a decree by the Ministry of Education and Culture which firmly established English in the curricula for junior and senior high schools in 1967. Other languages were also taught, such as French, German, and Dutch, continued to be taught in senior high schools, usually in addition to English. Subsequently, there were laws like in 1989, English compulsory subject in secondary schooling, leading to the termination of the teaching of other foreign languages. But later that was modified, and for other foreign languages were taught again, and English was taught as one of the foreign languages. In 1990, English was officially recognized as a subject in the national curriculum of primary schools, and English was to be an option from the 4th grade. In 1993, English was allowed to be taught in primary schools from grade 4 as an optional local subject. In cases where there was a demand for it in the local community and if a qualified teacher was available. So there's been a lot of policies that's been implemented. I'm not able to do justice to all the policies here. I've written a bit more about this in my book on English in ASEAN, just published by Routledge. In Vietnam, English generally was not widely spoken. In 1986, the Vietnamese government opened up the country, embarked on economic reforms, and that led to a nationwide rush to learn English. A lot of schools were set up. Parents sent their children to schools to learn English. English was seen as crucial for the development of the country. From the 1990s, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russian became not popular anymore. English became privileged as the main foreign language. And over time, Vietnamese and English became the two most highly sought languages. I mean, when Vietnam joined ASEAN, that was a further impetus for knowing English, and a greater emphasis was placed on learning the language. The government started a program called English 2020 that aimed to get all college graduates to be able to use English by the end of that decade. And English quickly became the predominant foreign language at all levels of education. It's been stated that by 1995, about 3/4 of all high school students studied English, with Russian as the next most studied language, and negligible numbers of students studying Chinese or French. By 2005, English accounted for 99% of the foreign language learning in Vietnamese junior secondary schools, with French, Russian, Chinese accounting for the remainder. And a curriculum for English in primary schools was introduced in 2003. And the target of what is called Resolution 1400 was that Vietnamese students were to study English from grade 3 to tertiary level by 2020. In Cambodia, you also see the growing emphasis on English. Until 1955, French was the language used as medium of instruction and education. It was a language of written legislation, intra-government documents. It was a language of commerce and banking. In the 1960s, the language of literacy and instruction at all levels of education became Khmer, although some schools reportedly also taught Chinese and Vietnamese as subjects of study. English has become the most preferred foreign language. It's seen to be requisite for a better job, for a scholarship from abroad, because lots of scholarships are given for students to pursue higher education in many different countries abroad. Parents also want their children to attend English language schools, and this is done after regular school hours. And you see a lot of schools being set up in Phnom Penh, in other parts, in urban areas, for children to learn English after regular school hours. So English has now replaced French as the most popular foreign language and is the highest in demand in Cambodia. It is taught from primary 5 for between 2 to 5 hours a week. That may have changed recently. And the government also promotes bilingual programs for speakers of indigenous languages. So you see that in all the ASEAN countries, there are also efforts to promote indigenous minority languages as well. In Laos, the first national curriculum, 1976, did not include foreign languages in primary schools, but French and English has remained subjects in secondary schools. French was then recognized as the first foreign language. The national curriculum, 1994, was similar. There were no foreign language instruction in primary schools. There were several foreign languages. French, Russian, and Vietnamese were taught as subjects in secondary schools. At that time, English was not included. But there was an important milestone in language policy, the 2008 National Primary Curriculum. English was introduced in grade 3, not in grade 6 as in the past for foreign languages. It replaced French, which became an optional second foreign language. Priority is now given to English in the amended Education Law of 2003. Myanmar also has had a different past. On independence from the British in 1948, Burmese was the medium of instruction for nearly all school subjects. It became the sole language of government administration, the mass media, the sole medium of instruction in government schools. It was banned from being used from 1964 to 1980. Teaching of English was banned altogether from 1966 to 1980. English later started to be taught from year 5, but there were issues and problems such as the inadequacy of teaching methods and teachers to teach the language. There was an education reform in 1980, and that brought considerable focus on English. Teaching was heavily reliant on native speakers of English. The new education program, initiated in 1981, aimed to improve the overall standard of education in the country. And English has been brought in. It's compulsory subject from kindergarten. It's the language of instruction at the upper secondary for science subjects and economics in certain schools. And there may have been new developments in policies as well. So therefore, we see in all the ASEAN countries, different phases, different paths of development where English is concerned. But in all of them, you can see that English has become actually the first foreign language in the country. And you see internationalization of higher education systems, the spread of English impacting on all the education systems in the region. It's considered the key to developing a global economy. Being able to communicate is crucial for the creation of an ASEAN community. It facilitates mobility and credit transfers across universities. You see the creation of a common higher education space, and you see different forces according to Kirkpatrick 2014, international campuses in ASEAN, international partnerships and cooperation with English-speaking countries, the setup of regional universities as well to cater for a diverse student market. Apart from that, I would just want to show you the developments that's taken place in the region in higher education as of the last so many years. Okay, we can see that before 2015, we became an ASEAN community. Before 2015, there were different visions, work plans, charters, There's the ASEAN Charter, the ASEAN Vision 2020. We've got the political security, economic, social culture blueprints, the ASEAN Work Plan from 2011 to 2015, working towards cooperation in the region. 2015, we became a community. And then 2016, 2020, another ASEAN 5-year work plan on education. We've got the move from the MDGs to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. That's also been incorporated in all the blueprints in national blueprints. It's also been incorporated in ASEAN blueprints. And you see cooperation between ASEAN with other nations, ASEAN +3, ASEAN +6. And you see a lot of efforts in ASEAN, the ASEAN University Network, the ASEAN Quality Assurance Network, the CIMA RIHEAD plays a role as well. And from 2015 onwards, there's even more efforts because ASEAN is considered a community now. So greater efforts taking place. We've got ASEAN Forging Ahead 2020 and other policies, other blueprints as well. So a lot has been happening in the region in the last 5 years, in the last 10 years. Okay, as I mentioned, regional mobility has been promoted apart from global mobility, government policies towards international students. There's a focus also on encouraging domestic students to study in the region. So therefore, there are intra-regional scholarships being given to study in ASEAN universities. There's the creation of the common higher education space, similar to what has taken place in Europe. So we've got, we've also got efforts from the EU, setting up a common higher education space as well, efforts from other countries outside ASEAN. There's the creation of the ASEAN International Mobility Program, where students from ASEAN actually go to another ASEAN country for 1 semester, 2 semesters. And in that way, actually, we also promote intra-ASEAN dialogue and interaction. And English is always the language that's used. So there's a drive towards creating more uniform systems, processes in higher education, furthering mobility of staff and students. So just like the Bologna process in Europe has led to harmonization of university degrees, facilitating student and staff mobility, transfer of credits that take place, ASEAN is also adopting similar mechanisms and structures. But because universities in ASEAN are all at different stages of development. A lot of effort has to be taken to try and actually create harmonization in the education system to enable students to actually move from degree programs from one country to another, and also to facilitate transfer credits. So those are all the efforts that are currently taking place in ASEAN. And we see a lot of capacity building programs as well, universities collaborating within the region to actually assist universities in other countries in the region. For example, programs on narrowing the development gap. So all these programs lead to partnerships in research within the region, student and staff exchanges, and the language that's used actually almost all the time would be English. And when we have all this training taking place, there could be established varieties of English, such as Malaysian English or Singapore English, that actually get transported into some of these contexts. But whether speakers actually turn to the more stable and developed localized forms of Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, and use them as role models, that remains to be seen. That needs actually further investigation. So I then quickly summarize, okay, from all the policies that have taken place, what can you say about the policies in general in ASEAN? So all countries have developed national language and education policies. There's not that much provision for the teaching of the national language or neighboring countries. So, for example, Thai and Filipino are taught mainly in their own country, but not so often in Malaysia, Cambodia, Vietnam, or Laos. So of the many languages that could be chosen, usually the dominant or politically relevant languages are selected, like Mandarin or Tamil in national schools in Malaysia. Number two is that all countries have promoted a local language as national language. So countries differ quite a lot, but there are many local languages that could have been selected, but not for the minority status. In Indonesia, that's an exception. Malay, Bahasa Indonesia is the national language of the country. So all policies propagate the selected national language. So in the end, you get a kind of bilingualism with the national language and English, and a marginal consideration of other local languages. The third point is that all countries include in their policies the issues of media of instruction and the choice of foreign languages. So this is often debated in every country. The normal solution for media of instruction is the choice of the national language. Other larger languages may be selected. English is a very frequent choice for the belief that it guarantees participation in the socio-economic domain, access to jobs, access to knowledge. But normally, if it's used in schools in many of the countries, it's restricted to subjects like mathematics and sciences. But it has become predominant at university level, mainly because all universities want to internationalize and they want students from other countries to come. So English has become the medium of instruction. The fourth point is that regarding the status of English, all countries have taken different paths on the basis of some widely shared attitudes. So 3 of the 5 founding members, Malaysia, Singapore, and the Philippines, former Anglophone countries. Thailand never colonized, Indonesia was a Dutch colony. So the early post-independence language policies favored a local national language, Malay in Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Tagalog in the Philippines, Thai in Thailand. Singapore made English the most important official language. Malay, Tamil, and Mandarin mother tongues, but other countries chose the national language, but then they struggle about the status and use of English, especially in education. So what about multilingualism? With all the emphasis on English being the lingua franca of the region, what about multilingualism? If you look at the charter, ASEAN Charter, it states that it seeks to inculcate respect for the different cultures, languages, and religions of the people of ASEAN, while emphasizing their common values in the spirit of unity in diversity. So this actually implies that ASEAN will have to take also a new look at the language education policy to allow for multilingualism and respect for the mother tongue. And there's been quite a lot of efforts that have been taking place in some of the countries in this respect. The one nation, one language ideology, the pragmatic rationale for language teaching, all these actually exert pressure on language policy. And and they often conflict with the multilingual realities of the nations involved. So what we've seen is the promotion of a few languages as national languages, and English has been acknowledged as playing a vital role in the development of an ASEAN identity. It's been stated as by the SecGen of ASEAN, with the diversity in ASEAN reflected in our diverse histories, races, cultures, and belief systems, English is an important and indispensable tool to bring the community closer. So with internationalization, what are the implications for language policy and language planning? The status of English has to be addressed in language policies to ensure the balance of languages vis-a-vis English. It may be practical in Singapore, Malaysia, Brunei, and the Philippines. It's a major change in certain countries, for example, the CLMV countries, the former Indochina countries. And economic policy discourse normally is emphasized, and that neglects the rights of all other languages in a national habitat. So therefore, a national social rights discourse is also necessary to complement this, leading to a more comprehensive national language policy in education. So what types of English? Codification of English has been summarized. There are three different views. Maintenance of an exonormative native model, the choice of a local variety following the outer circle concept, a shift to a Southeast Asian lingua franca model. So that's been discussed as to which particular one should be used. It's also been highlighted a lot, for example, by Kirkpatrick, that English can be represented as an Asian lingua franca spoken by multilingual ASEAN speakers. This concept would affect all language education, its curriculum. The goal of learners would be to communicate effectively with other multilinguals, taking into account code switching as a norm in oral communication. Testing and competence has to be measured against the norms of successful Asian multilinguals rather than native norms. Development of an ASEAN curriculum, including an ASEAN perspective of English, also needs to be thought about and actually worked on. So the debates are not about English, British, American, Australian norms anymore. Aspirations for wanting to sound native-like no longer exist as strongly as they did in the past. There's a recognition that English will become more Asian in practice, and that a more Asian perspective of second language learning in language policies is unavoidable. And also I mentioned about the diverse nature of English across Southeast Asia. Some of the stabilized varieties are Malaysian, Singapore, Philippines. They may become real role models. They may get transported. This has to be further looked at. But if you look at even countries that have not inherited an English base, there are reasonably stable features that resemble those varieties due to some shared typological features or maybe adoption through language contact. There's the tension between the national varieties, regional varieties, and the desired command of English that needs to be addressed. And then there needs to be also the question asked about, should localized forms be ignored in textbooks when they're part and parcel of what school and university brings with them? So therefore, we need a practical and a policy response. English as a lingua franca option for higher education institutions, okay, that's been talked about, but that would still need to be restricted to a semi-formal spoken context. You still need a form of international English for writing, especially academic writing. So whatever target variety is thought to be the most adequate, even the lingua franca approach cannot dissociate English from culture and pragmatic norms. So given the big difference between ASEAN countries, and that English is considered one of the languages spoken by the locals in some countries, it's used sometimes as a language for foreigners only in certain countries. So what advice can we give pedagogy in a region where English is set in multilingual context? And if English is commonly spoken with other ASEAN speakers, then what would be the common features that are regularly used by them? So these are all questions that have to be asked. I think I'm a bit running out of time. Okay, I'll move on to the last slide. So we ask ourselves, will ASEAN also place an emphasis on Southeast Asian languages in education and cross-border communication as maintained in some of the ASEAN policy plans? Will we give way to English? And also, what about the geopolitical roadmap suggested, for example, by China's Belt and Road Initiative to promote Mandarin? Is that an option for some countries? Would that be an unlikely option? So there are forces that affect the manifestations of English and its position overall, and that have repercussions in language policies. So what is clear that all countries have the pressure to promote the national language and to have a pragmatic second or foreign language is in conflict with the multilingual realities that exist. Foreign language learning of neighboring countries or other European countries should be rethought and also modernized. And I think I conclude by saying that a regional policy for English that caters local and international needs should be thought about more and discussed. An ASEAN-wide approach towards standards, the growth of stable language features, the appropriate English curriculum, a regional policy to ensure that local languages do not die or lose too many domains to English, that needs further consideration. And unless regional governments develop holistic and coherent language education policies, it is likely that English will continue to increase its range at the expense of local and regional languages. So therefore, the region needs to find a way in which English can coexist with other languages. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So as one of the online participants said, this is a very informative overview of the language policies in ASEAN. Unfortunately, we have run out of time as we have back-to-back plenary speeches. So if you'd like to address any questions or comments, please visit Professor Hashim in the virtual platform in the lounge from 2 o'clock to 2:20 Standard Korean Time. Thank you very much. And please also join us for our general meeting later today and our closing ceremony. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hashim. Thank you very much.